You may proceed, Kim.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court?
Yeah.
Ms. Wood and Ms. Shepard. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, James Scott did not kill Paige Ward. The evidence today will show that he was too sick to have done so, that he loved Paige too much to have done it, and that there is too much evidence that James Ward, that estranged husband, that missing mystery man, did it. Not only that, you're going to hear that James Scott had too little time to have committed this crime, that there was too little blood at the scene for him to have done it, and that there's too little investigation was done by the Elk City Police Department for us to convict an innocent man. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of facts and numbers in this case, but I am confident that once you've seen them all, you will see that the prosecution's story does not add up. On July 10th, 2007, James Scott was too sick to have killed Paige Ward. Now, you're going to see a medical report that indicates that that night he had a temperature of 102.6 degrees. You're going to see that medical report, and it's also going to tell you that he was nauseous, that he was unable to tolerate the intake of fluid. You're also going to hear from the doctor that made that report, and she's going to tell you that James Scott was too sick to take care of himself on the night of the murder. Too sick to take care of himself. Now, the prosecution, they're going to tell you another story. They're going to say this James Scott, the same man that was too sick to take care of himself, forcefully broke into the locked home of Paige Ward, where he struggled with her for over 3 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't add up. On July 10th, 2007, James Scott was too much in love with Paige to have committed this heinous act. Now, they had been through some bumpy times to be sure, but the evidence is going to show that they were getting back together and that she loved him. James Scott himself will testify that they were getting back together. He's going to show you a letter that she wrote to him the week of the murder saying that she loved him and that they would be together. James Scott is going to say, I loved her and I wouldn't have done such a heinous thing because it wouldn't add up. Ladies and gentlemen, there's too much evidence on July 10th, 2007 that James Ward, that estranged husband, committed this heinous act. Now, we know he had a motive. Paige had been seeing a divorce lawyer, and this upset him. Further, you'll see that he was jealous. He'd been fighting with Scott at work, and he said, and I quote, "If I can't have Paige, no one can." Ladies and gentlemen, James Ward hasn't been seen since the day of the murder. James Ward, the husband of a murder victim, disappears, and he's never interviewed. That doesn't add up. Now, the prosecution made a lot out of the fact that James went by James at work, and James Scott went by Jim. But you're also going to hear that sometimes James Ward went by the name of Jim too. And who called him that? The person that died, the victim, the person that made that call that she quoted to you. Now, on July 10th, 2007, James Scott had too little time to have killed Paige Ward, we will see. According to the medical report, James Scott met with a doctor at Elk City Memorial Hospital at 11:35 p.m. that evening. Now, we know from the 911 call that they quoted earlier that the killer was in the house until at least 11:18. So that would have given him, at most, 17 minutes to clean up the scene of the crime, get in his car, drive across town, go to the emergency room, and see a doctor. 17 minutes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this line in the opening.
Grounds?
This is entirely speculative of how long it would take a killer to clean up a crime scene afterwards. This 17 minutes he's speaking of is entirely speculative.
Your Honor, I think I had grounds entirely, 11:35 and 11:18, that's 17 minutes. So that's objective reality. Those are based on evidence.
Will that come into evidence?
That will come into evidence.
Overruled.
You will hear from Detective Bailey that he devised a test, and that the average time for his test was 21 minutes when driving from Paige's house to the hospital. Now remember that Scott only had 17 minutes. And Out of 24 trials that Detective Bailey ran, only one trip that he will tell you about was less than 21 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't add up. Now, you're going to hear that on July 10th, 2007, James Scott awoke from a nap with the flu. He was deathly ill. He needed to get to the hospital, but he had locked his keys in his car. So he did what he could, and he smashed the driver's side window to get into that car so he could drive himself to the hospital and receive treatment. In doing so, he sustained a 12-centimeter cut across the back of his hand. 12 centimeters. That's nearly 5 inches. Now, the prosecution is going to tell you that he sustained that cut when he was breaking into Paige Ward's house, that he smashed out the door, the glass in the front door. But they're also going to tell you that there wasn't really all that much blood at the scene of the crime. Well, it's true there was a little bit of blood on the door, and the medical examiner later found some blood on the throat and chest of Paige Ward. There wasn't that much blood. In fact, the DNA test they performed was inconclusive. Now, they also told you about the blood, it was A positive, and that James Scott's blood was A positive. Well, that's true. But 100 million Americans also have A positive blood. And what are they not going to tell you? They're not going to tell you what James Ward, the estranged husband, what his blood type was. Ladies and gentlemen, even the blood doesn't matter. The events of July 10th, 2007 were horrific. They shook this community to its core, and there should have been an extensive investigation. But you're going to hear that instead this community was left with too little investigation. Detective Bailey never found James Ward, Paige's estranged husband. You'll hear that he hardly even looked for him.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the use of the word estranged to refer to James Ward. There's no indication that there was any divorce proceedings or that they were not still in a relationship with one another.
Your Honor, they lived in separate houses. They had for some time. The defendant's going to testify to the fact that they've been separated for some time, and that Paige had been seeing a lawyer, and we believe that there's foundation for it, and it's admissible. All right, overruled. Now you're going to hear Detective Bailey fairly even looks for this estranged husband. He'll tell you that he never searched James Ward's house. He'll tell you he never even tried to get a warrant. He'll tell you he never went to any of James Ward's old employers, though he had record of them. He could have talked to people there. He'll tell you he only interviewed one person at Home Depot, where James Ward worked. The husband of a murder victim, a main suspect, never interviewed. That doesn't add up. Ladies and gentlemen, whatever evidence that the prosecution plans to bring to court today, they cannot get around the simple facts of this case. James Scott was too sick to have done it. He was too much in love with Paige to have done it. And there is too much evidence that James Ward, that estranged husband, did it. Further, there was too little time for James to have committed the crime. There wasn't enough blood at the scene for it to bend him, as he had a giant cut on his hand. And finally, there was far too little investigation by the police department for us to hold this innocent man accountable for a crime he just did not commit. Whatever evidence the prosecution does have, ladies and gentlemen, I promise you, it doesn't matter. Thanks.
Thank you, counsel.